American cable giant Comcast is capping customers' data plans. It could be the start of a major shift for an industry trying to stay afloat in the age of streaming. That story kicks off the roundup. Nicole Verkindt is president of OMX. This Comcast story, I mean, people get so worked up about data caps and this kind of stuff. What is the longer-term concern here?
Well, I think the answer is always more competition. I'm always going to say that, obviously. The answer is not increased regulation. I think about data roaming. And do you remember data roaming used to be outrageous? And there was all these instances where people would go to the States, they'd actually leave their phone on, or they'd go to an all-inclusive resort, they'd come back $20,000, and it's all over the media. Well, then there was 3 or 4 startups that I knew that sprung up. They raised a lot of money. They did very well. They had special chips that you would add to your phone when you leave. And then all of a sudden, Rogers got a hold of that, and they added the Roam Like Home, and then the other guys followed. And so as soon as you have competition, I think that's the right way to regulate it. But in this case, there's infrastructure barriers, or there's massive infrastructure expenditure in this space, and so you probably need some of this regulation.
So right now, they're saying this is like Comcast is doing this. They're calling it a test. It's not really a test anymore. They've expanded it now to Chicago, but the cap is 1 terabyte. I cannot.
It's huge.
It's huge. How long will it be huge for, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I'm sure the cap will come down. The interesting...
But how long will a terabyte be something that we consider huge? When we start streaming, HD, 4K, whatever video, and all your television you're consuming is via the internet rather than, a hardwired thing to a box on top of your television, a terabyte might soon feel like, a megabyte today.
Yeah, but this is where they need to make money. And it's interesting. I kind of consider it like a Netflix tax, right? So the cable companies are losing a whole bunch of customers to companies like Netflix, and now people are streaming massive amounts, so they're going to have increased bills. It's going to go right back to the original company.
Well, if the answer in the wireless world was, and maybe still is here in Canada, is competition, what does that look like? I mean, given, as you say, the technological sort of barriers here, does somebody need to just innovate that space, and who's going to do it?
Right, and we saw it in the cell phone space with Wind and Fido, and then they got bought by the big
That's what
companies.
happens, right?
So I think in the interim, something like at least alerting customers you're about to go over, this is how much you're going over by, requiring that alert system, and then not gouging. I mean, I know what data costs. I'm very familiar with those costs. Yeah. It's pennies. It's nothing. So why are we charging like 3 times what your bill is?
Because you're...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the Uber drivers in Ontario are now automatically insured. You turn on the app and it just kicks in. For such a fight over, the lead up to this, wow, a pretty simple solution kicks in. Does this put it all away? I mean, does it show how simple this should have been from the beginning?
Well, it shows how much slower regulation is than innovation. I mean,
fair enough.
Uber's been in Toronto for 4 years and Canada for at least 3.5. So, but I think the insurance industry needs more innovation as well. So we had to put this overarching policy that would just apply to every single car. But the problem is you have Uber drivers that want to drive for 2 hours a week.
Fair enough,
so why is it the same cost for them? Why can't we just track in real time and have some kind of per usage? I'm not sure, but I think there has to be more innovation in the insurance industry as well.
It is one of those, the insurance industry is such an interesting indicator in terms of when it does get on board. Boy, it's hard to say this is no longer, Uber's not going to happen anymore. The insurance industry gets on board, write it off. This is going to be a thing for a long time. But you're right, it is really slow in adapting to these. How do you... and it's a hard space to innovate because there's so much financial risk to it.
It is, but Uber is representative. Like the Uberization of everything is happening right now, and so insurance will have to catch up with concepts like Airbnb, other peer-to-peer markets, and so I think they're going to need to use this model and apply it across pretty much every sector within the next couple of years. Like
Uber for the insurance industry.
There you go. I'm stealing that idea.
The story of Theranos, the CEO is Elizabeth Holmes. They were to be the next big thing. The talk about innovating. They were going to innovate a space health that hadn't been innovated since the 1800s. The fall from grace in this story is spectacular.
It's huge.
She's been banned now from running a lab for 2 years. What happens to this company now? I mean, can Theranos, just to remind people, this was a company that said instead of drawing blood, they could do all these blood tests by just doing a pinprick on your finger. And it was evaluated at, $9 billion? Yeah. She was valued at $4.5 billion, and now the company's at $800 million, and she's at 0.
So look, this is the way I see it. Highly, highly intelligent woman. I was following her for years. She's my age. She raised massive amounts of money. She has hundreds of patents to her name, so she's highly technical. I think she got into a lot of arguments with her engineers. I saw blog posts 6 more months ago from those people on Glassdoor.com complaining about her. I think where she went wrong is that I guess it was the Wall Street Journal that broke the story.
A series of stories.
They were the real regulators in this. But I think where she went wrong is as soon as that story came out, she just sort of danced around it. She didn't address it. She didn't say, yes, we did overmarket, or here's the independent third-party test. And I think that was her problem, and now she's going to see the bleed out.
Does this tell us more about, valuating these companies at exorbitant $9 billion valuations when we don't really have enough data to do it? Like, what is the illustration this tells us about where we're at in valuing these companies?
Well, exactly. This was another massive unicorn. Okay, they had an anchor client, Walgreens, big company.
Sure.
But you're right, that happens frequently. I think we all know they're going to be worth a lot of money and they're very valuable, but is it, like 60 times EBITDA? And most of them are losing money. I'm not really sure what company was that. But.
And at the same time, it sort of feels like, as I said, this is a space that desperately wanted and needed to be innovated. And they had a great idea. Maybe it can't do that, but it feels like her and the company's fall from grace doesn't necessarily mean that, it might limit the next person to come in and try to innovate
and we can't do that. That is extremely dangerous because we need to see a lot more innovation in this space. And I mean, look at just demographics and baby boomers, and we're going to need to see a lot more innovation in the medical space, and we need to encourage it. And I think she still has hundreds of patents, and her testing actually works.
We'll hear from this woman again. But from a startup perspective, does this scare the next guy from trying to go into the space, or do they say, "Good, get out. I'm going to come in now and make my $9 billion valuation"?
I think the unfortunate part is it scares investors, right? So I think a lot of venture capitalists are going to lose a lot of money on this deal. It was so overvalued, and so the next time they see a deal that smells like this, they're going to be reminded and be jaded.
Lastly, Sobeys president has abruptly left the company. You're a CEO. Does this remind us that the guy at the top, woman at the top, is ultimately responsible? Lousy, whatever.
They're the closest to the door.
Closest to the door. and when you underperform, out you go.
Yeah, what I saw in this story, it was really interesting that his high school friend was running Metro, and they were both bidding on Safeway. So I think he overpaid for Safeway. I think the integration was botched up, and then there was a recession in Alberta, and I don't think the brands aligned very well. I think Sobeys was a high-end brand, and Safeway was low-end. The market is really competitive, as we saw, huge amount of consolidation, and so I think it was a perfect storm, but he was responsible for 2 of the 3 things.
And again, this is an industry that you want to see people taking risk on. You want to see people...
Loblaws is killing it right now.
Right? And
really
so what are they doing right that Sobeys didn't? Was it just acquisitions? It feels like there's something more to this.
Yeah, that's what I saw. I just saw it was like a combination of all these things, and I think the acquisition... It was a $3 billion write-down of goodwill is what I saw. I mean, that just kills you, right? So you acquire a company for a price, and you're paying for a lot of that goodwill, and then overnight that becomes worthless. I think that scares shareholders.
As it would. I mean, same-store sales at shops open more than a year decreased by 1.8%. And this is not a new company. This is a legacy brand with recognizable. You would expect that they would be able to do better than that.
Right, so he reported the earnings, and then he was out the next day.
Yeah, well, and does it, as a CEO, is it something that stays top of mind that you're always aware of, that you don't deliver, you could be the first to go?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of going down with the ship, right? I think you're the last one off, or you're the first one out when you screw up. So.
But are you sort of intrinsically aware of that? And I've only ever just been a soldier in somebody else's army. Is it tough to be the general?
Of course. Yeah, a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah, well, there you go. All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Always a pleasure to have you. Nice to see you again.
Thanks, Peter.
All right.